Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most dramatic events in modern history, the Great Depression. But we're going to look at it from a specific angle: how the United States, in many ways, unintentionally set the stage for its own economic catastrophe. It's a story of overconfidence, risky decisions, and a spectacular crash that changed the world forever. So, how did the Roaring Twenties end with such a deafening silence? Let's find out. Imagine the 1920s in America. It was a decade of unprecedented prosperity. Nicknamed the Roaring Twenties, jazz music was everywhere. People were dancing the Charleston, and for the first time, ordinary families could afford cars and radios. The economy was booming, and the stock market seemed like a one-way ticket to riches. Everyone, from Wall Street bankers to shoeshine boys, was talking about stocks. This widespread belief that the market could only go up created a dangerous sense of invincibility. People felt the good times would never end. This optimism fueled a massive bubble. One of the biggest culprits was something called buying on margin. What does that mean? Basically, you could buy stocks with borrowed money. You'd only need to put down a small percentage, say 10%, and a broker would lend you the other 90%. So, with just $100 of your own money, you could control $1,000 worth of stock. If the stock went up, you'd make a huge profit on your small investment. It seemed like a foolproof way to get rich quick. The problem: if the stock went down, you'd still owe the broker the full amount you borrowed, and you could lose far more than your initial investment. This easy credit wasn't just for stocks. The 1920s saw a massive expansion of consumer credit. For the first time, people were encouraged to buy now, pay later for everything from furniture to new appliances. This created an artificial demand. Factories were churning out goods at a record pace, but they were doing so based on the assumption that people would keep buying on credit. This cycle of debt was creating a very fragile economic structure. It looked strong on the surface, but underneath, it was built on borrowed time and borrowed money. At the same time, there was a huge wealth gap. While the rich were getting richer, a large portion of the population, especially farmers and factory workers, wasn't sharing in the prosperity. Farmers were struggling with overproduction and falling prices after World War I, and many workers' wages weren't keeping up with the rising productivity. This meant that the majority of the country didn't have the real purchasing power to sustain the economic boom. The engine of the economy was running on fumes, relying on the spending of a wealthy few and the credit of the many. So you have a stock market pumped up by borrowed money, an economy fueled by consumer debt, and a massive inequality in wealth. It was a house of cards waiting for a gust of wind. And that gust came in the fall of 1929. The market started to wobble. Some smart investors began to realize that the stock prices were ridiculously disconnected from the actual value of the companies. They started to sell as more people sold. Panic began to set in. Then came Black Tuesday, October 29th, 1929. The dam broke. Everyone tried to sell their stocks at once, but there were no buyers. Prices plummeted. In a single day, the market lost billions of dollars, wiping out fortunes overnight. People who had bought on margin were hit the hardest. They received margin calls from their brokers demanding they pay back their loans immediately. But the value of their stocks had vanished. They were ruined. The stock market crash was the trigger, but the real crisis was just beginning. The panic spread from Wall Street to Main Street. People rushed to the banks to withdraw their savings, afraid the banks would fail. This created bank runs. The problem was, banks didn't keep all the cash on hand. They had loaned it out or invested it. When everyone demanded their money at once, the banks collapsed. Thousands of banks across the country failed, and with them, the life savings of millions of ordinary people disappeared forever. With banks failing and credit drying up, businesses couldn't get loans to operate. People, terrified of the future, stopped spending money. This led to a devastating downward spiral. With no one buying goods, factories had to lay off workers. With millions unemployed, even fewer people could afford to buy anything. Production ground to a halt. Businesses went bankrupt. Unemployment skyrocketed, eventually reaching a staggering 25%. 1 in 4 working Americans was jobless. The government's initial response, unfortunately, made things worse. Instead of stimulating the economy, they raised interest rates, making it even harder for people and businesses to get money. Then, in 1930, the U.S. government passed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff, which placed huge taxes on imported goods. The idea was to protect American industries, but the result was a disaster. Other countries retaliated with their own tariffs, and global trade collapsed. This turned a national crisis into a worldwide Great Depression. It was like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. Looking back, the shooting themselves in the foot analogy really fits. The wild speculation on margin, the reliance on consumer debt, the protectionist trade policies, and the flawed initial response by policymakers. All of these were self-inflicted wounds that turned a stock market correction into the worst economic disaster of the 20th century. The Roaring Twenties had created a system that was fundamentally unstable, and when it finally broke, it brought the whole world down with it. The lessons learned from this painful period are still incredibly relevant today, reminding us of the dangers of speculation, debt, and the importance of sound economic policy. Thanks so much for watching. The Great Depression is a massive topic, and this was just one look at its origins. If you found this interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments what you think, or if there are other historical events you'd like me to cover. See you in the next video.